In July 1969, the entire world was watching the same place, the moon. For centuries, it had been unreachable, distant, untouchable. Now, 3 men were on their way to it. Their mission was called Apollo 11. The spacecraft entered lunar orbit. Then came the most dangerous part, the landing. As the lunar module descended, problems began to appear. The computer started flashing alarms. Fuel was running low. The landing site was covered in rocks. The module was drifting. Mission control watched in silence. With only seconds of fuel left, the commander took manual control. His name was Neil Armstrong. He searched for a safe place to land. The clock kept ticking. Then, finally, contact. The module touched down. Armstrong spoke the words mission control had been waiting for. The Eagle has landed. Hours later, a hatch opened. A ladder descended, and a human foot touched the moon for the first time. Armstrong looked down and spoke a single sentence. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. In that moment, history changed. Not through war, not through destruction, but through exploration. For the first time, humanity had left its home planet and stepped onto another world. The moon was no longer just something we looked at. It was a place we had been. In October 1962, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in the Cuban Missile Crisis. American ships surrounded Cuba, trying to stop Soviet missiles from arriving. But the most dangerous moment wasn't on the surface. Beneath the ocean, Soviet submarines were already there. One of them was B-59. Inside the submarine, the crew had lost contact with Moscow. They didn't know what was happening above them. Then, explosions shook the water around the submarine. American forces were dropping depth charges. They were meant as warning signals, but inside B-59, they sounded like the beginning of a war. The submarine was carrying a nuclear torpedo, powerful enough to destroy an entire fleet. According to protocol, launching it required the approval of 3 officers. 2 of them believed the war had already begun. They wanted to fire. One man disagreed. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. Arkhipov argued that there was no proof of a nuclear war. He refused to approve the launch. The tension inside the submarine was unbearable. Voices were raised. The pressure was intense. But Arkhipov stood his ground. Because of that decision, the nuclear torpedo was never launched. The submarine surfaced. No one on the surface knew how close the world had come. There was no explosion, no announcement, no celebration. The world slept peacefully, unaware of how close it had been to disaster. In July 1944, a military briefing was held at Adolf Hitler's headquarters, known as the Wolf's Lair. By this point in the war, Germany was already losing. That reality had reached even the officers standing in this room. A group among them believed that removing Hitler was the only way to stop the war. Their plan focused on this meeting. A bomb was brought into the briefing room, hidden inside a briefcase. It was placed close to Hitler, under the conference table. Minutes later, the bomb exploded. The explosion destroyed much of the room. 4 people inside were killed instantly. Hitler survived, not because the bomb failed, but because the briefcase had been moved slightly before the explosion. That movement placed a thick wooden table leg between Hitler and the blast. Medical reports later confirmed that without this obstruction, the explosion would have been fatal. Because Hitler survived, the plan collapsed. The coup that depended on his death never began. Those involved were arrested and executed, and the war continued for months after that meeting ended. All of this happened inside a single room, during a single briefing, because a briefcase was moved a few inches. In June 1914, Europe was formally at peace. Military alliances existed. Empires maintained large standing armies. However, a global war was not considered unavoidable. That summer, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo. The visit was intended as a political demonstration. Earlier that day, an assassination attempt occurred. A bomb was thrown at the motorcade, but failed to hit its target. The Archduke was not injured. Several attackers fled the area. Authorities assumed the threat had ended. The planned route of the motorcade was altered. The driver was not informed of the change. At an intersection, the car slowed and came to a stop. Nearby stood Gavrilo Princip, one of the original conspirators. He had believed the operation was over. The Archduke's vehicle was now directly in front of him. Princip approached the car and fired 2 shots. One struck Franz Ferdinand. The second struck his wife, Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg. Both died shortly afterward. The event led to diplomatic ultimatums, military mobilizations, and the activation of alliance treaties. Within weeks, war began in Europe. It later expanded beyond the continent. The conflict resulted in the deaths of more than 16 million people. The sequence of events began with a navigation error that was not corrected in time. The year is 1789. France is facing a deep economic and social crisis. In Paris, large parts of the population struggle with hunger and poverty. The tax burden falls mainly on the majority of the people, while the royal court and privileged classes remain largely exempt. King Louis XVI continues to rule from Versailles, but the state is nearing financial collapse. Droughts and repeated crop failures have intensified food shortages. In response, the king summons the Estates General, a representative assembly that has not been called for 175 years. The voting system immediately immediately becomes a point of conflict. Representatives of the Third Estate demand equal political representation. On June 17, 1789, they declare themselves the National Assembly. 3 days later, members of the Assembly vow not to disperse until a constitution is established. At the same time, royal troops gather around Paris, increasing public concern. On July 14, 1789, crowds in Paris move to seize weapons. The Bastille is attacked and eventually taken. The fall of the Bastille triggers a chain reaction across the country. In rural areas, peasants begin to resist feudal obligations. On August 26, 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen is adopted. It establishes legal equality and fundamental rights. In October, the king and queen are brought from Versailles to Paris. From that point on, the monarchy operates under direct public pressure. The French Revolution fundamentally alters the structure of political power. Authority begins to shift away from absolute rule and toward the concept of popular sovereignty. Many modern political systems were shaped by the process that began in 1789.